Well, welcome back, everyone, to episode numero 5 of the Salty Socks podcast. Sean, it's been a while since we last talked.
It has been. You know, we had some vacations. We had some illness. Joseph almost lost his life.
It was close.
Very, very sick. He still has a lingering cough. So if you ever see a General Grievous clip inserted coughing, it's to cover Joseph's real cough to keep the flow of the podcast going. So just a full disclaimer.
We don't want to see that nastiness.
That's right.
Well, this week, as you guys seen from the video title, we are talking about the prequels and answering the question, do the prequels deserve as much hate as they get? An interesting topic that I'm actually very excited about. This was one, when we were first brainstorming ideas, I was most excited about because of how divisive of an issue it is and how it helped me kind of coherently center my thoughts about what I actually think about the prequels. We've already done our rankings. If you remember, Sean's highest prequel was episode 3, which was what, your number 4?
That was my number 4, yes. I love Revenge of the Sith.
And I think my highest is also the 3rd one, but it is much further down the list.
So I think, like you said, it's very divisive, this question of, are the prequels good? Do you like the prequels for people? It's kind of the original Last Jedi, right? It's before The Last Jedi ever came along, people would argue, were the prequels good, or do you just hate the prequels? And it was kind of, for a long time, I think, in our life, popular to hate the prequels. It's kind of the cool thing to say that you knew the prequels were bad and you were above the prequels because you were a Star Wars purist. So we're going to dissect all of that today. But before we jump into what we think now, our relationship with the prequels, we thought we would throw it back to when the prequels were released. What did we think of them as 10-year-olds when The Phantom Menace was released, as 13-year-olds, as 16-year-olds? How did we feel about the prequels upon release? So, Joseph, talk to us about how you felt about those movies at that time in your life and maybe some memories you have.
So I think that is the perfect segue because my age, our ages when the prequels came out defines, I feel like, this whole video we're going to talk about. Because our ages when they came out determine how much we loved the prequels as kids. And the quote that we shared in the previous podcast where George Lucas made Star Wars for 10-year-olds, Sean and I were 10 years old when episode 1 came out. Like, we were the target audience for Jar Jar Binks and battle droids and Qui-Gon and Darth Maul and all that stuff. Like, he was making the movie for us. And I loved it. I loved episode 1. I had tons of action figures. I remember when the video came out on VHS, I was starting to come down with something, and I kind of over-exaggerated how sick I felt so that I could watch episode 1 from home on the school day it came out. Later, it turned out that I had mono, and I was actually home for about 2 weeks, and I watched the movie just on repeat all the time.
So let me just interrupt you there real quick. One, the question I have is, are you then over-exaggerating how sick you are right now? That's because it seems like you have a habit of that. 2, ironically, 12 years later, you would give me that same mono. So, you know, we would share that strain of disease. So it's fun that our Star Wars fandom actually is linked in more ways than one.
Life forms living together for mutual advantage.
Yeah, that's true. At least I didn't have zombie breath, though. Let's see, what else?
Bad.
So that was episode 1. That was when I was 10. Episode 2 came out when I was 13. I remember going to the theater with my older brother. I kind of tagged along with him. I actually kind of felt like he didn't really want me there. So I kind of sat a row behind him and his friend. And I had the soundtrack because they released it a few weeks before the movie, and I was just sitting there with my Walkman listening to the soundtrack before the movie even came on. And I loved episode 2. I thought it was the greatest movie ever made up until that point. Episode 3 was also the same way. And I remember as a teenager thinking, how come the prequels don't get Oscars and award nominations? Because like Lord of the Rings was getting all these award nominations, and I'm like, where's Star Wars?
This is outrageous. It's unfair.
And it wasn't until I got to college, and I'm being dead serious when I say this, it wasn't until I got to college that I realized that people have a hatred for the prequels. And it rocked my world. It was very upsetting. And then, from then on, I had this different lens of watching the prequels with a, oh, these aren't that good sort of mentality.
Yeah.
So all thanks to you, Sean. Merrill Hall, 1100.
Well, I'm sorry that I was responsible for that, but I think so I'll go through mine, and I think I went through a similar thing where I kind of, other people taught me that I wasn't supposed to like the prequels.
You want to go home and rethink your life.
I want to go home and rethink my life.
That they weren't good. And then once somebody points out all the flaws, it's hard to unsee them.
Yes.
But anyway, I'll go through mine. So I couldn't agree more with you. The age thing absolutely shapes how I see the prequels, because we were 10. And for a 10-year-old, everything in The Phantom Menace landed. Everything was good. For me, I loved seeing more Jedi. I loved Qui-Gon, and I loved Obi-Wan as a Padawan, and I loved pod racing, and I loved Jar Jar. I thought he was funny. A 10-year-old thinks Jar Jar is funny.
Uh-huh.
And there was totally a disconnect for me. I didn't think, oh, are these movies going to be like the original trilogy movies? I thought, this is just Star Wars movie that I really love. It's not, I wasn't comparing to the original trilogy as I watched them as a kid. But I mean, I loved Darth Maul. It was the coolest thing ever to see the double-bladed lightsaber. I loved the Naboo N1 starfighters, the yellow starfighters. I thought it was so cool. You kind of, at that age, somewhat can relate to Anakin as the little boy, the 9-year-old boy. It's kind of like, that's kind of like me. So I saw nothing wrong with Jake Lloyd's performance of Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace. So it just was
and
really,
you fell
really...
in love with Queen Amidala and Padme?
That actually happened for me in episode 2. In episode 1, I did not yet have an infatuation with Natalie Portman. But I remember actually after episode 1 that I wish we had nowadays, but we don't because of the internet and the rise of social media. But after episode 1, I had so much fun talking with my friends and speculating what was going to happen in these movies.
Like Anakin, you mean? Like
what?
How is Anakin going to turn to the Darth Vader?
Exactly, because we knew that was going to happen. Okay, we know Anakin Skywalker is going to become Darth Vader, so how was it going to happen? And I remember after episode 1, I don't remember if it came from my sister who got it off the internet or a friend at school or something, told me this crazy theory that I still remember to this day because I was just enthralled by this idea that Darth Maul survived, which was ahead of its time because that actually does happen in the Clone Wars animated series, but I didn't know that at the time, that Darth Maul was going to survive and Anakin was going to get injured or something beyond repair, and they were going to have to transplant organs from Darth Maul into Anakin, thereby turning Anakin to the dark side because the Force through osmosis was going to turn him to the dark side. Obviously, none of that happened.
That's crazy.
That is just a crazy theory, but my 10-year-old mind thought, oh, that's going to be crazy. And I, because I was a 10-year-old, would go around telling people that I knew for a fact that was what was going to happen, as if I was an authority on the screenplays for episode 2 and 3. But it just was this really fun time of, as a kid, my first experience, I think, seeing a movie and anticipating the next movie and trying to guess what was going to happen.
Careful you must be when sensing the future, Anakin.
That was Star Wars was my first experience with that kind of thing. So then episode 2, like you said, we're now 13. We're kind of, into puberty. I am like in love with Natalie Portman.
And that's the love story movie.
Right. And as a 13-year-old, that romance isn't really cringeworthy because your idea of romance and love is so naive that you're like, this is probably how it happens.
Romance for you is cringeworthy. I mean,
yeah, it just is like, this is real life. Like, this is how it happens.
This
so
is
you
how
just
get the girl.
you buy into it
you
totally.
Float her a mango.
Yeah, and Anakin being immature and impatient and whiny is like, well, a 13-year-old, you're not like, he's so immature. You're like, oh yeah, he's really upset his mom died. Like, that's real. And when you're like watching a movie and you're a young age and you see people who are clearly supposed to be older than you in the movie, you automatically see them as like kind of adults, even though he's supposed to be, I don't know how old in episode 2, 16 or something. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, so I thought, it all worked for me, and I thought I was really hyped for episode 2 because I had watched in an interview a producer or something teased this line of, in this movie you're going to see why they called Yoda a great warrior. So I was like, oh, we're going to see Yoda like totally do something awesome in this movie. And the whole scene with Yoda or whatever, with Count Dooku, I'm in the theater as a 13-year-old, like squealing with delight, like just think it's the coolest thing that he's flipping around and all this stuff. So I loved it. Episode 3, I'm now 16. It's much darker. It's kind of much more angsty. It kind of goes along with the 16-year-old's mindset of you're like, oh yeah, like the world's unfair and he has to do things he doesn't want to do, and why should he have to hide that he's in love? Like, this is crazy. And this idea of forbidden love and all this kind of, I don't know. It just kind of lined up really well with our ages. And so, it wasn't until I got much older that I would watch Revenge of the Sith and be like, oh yeah, Anakin, there were a lot better ways to handle this. I'm not sure what you were thinking here, but at the time I thought you were very wise.
Right.
That your only option was to kill Mace Windu and turn to the dark side. Okay, so obviously we both liked them when they first came out. They were important movies for our childhood and adolescence, but now, what do we think about them now? Now that we're 10 years, 15 years removed from those times, what do you think about the prequels nowadays, Joseph?
I loved them when I was a kid. I really kind of hated them and despised them in college. And now that there's more movies that have come out, and kind of like those movies and those books have kind of given credibility back to the prequels, and my own children watch the prequels, I've started really to taking a liking to them again. I understand their flaws, and I see their flaws, and Abby lets me know about them all the time, but I can kind of look past those because I kind of understand the history of the prequels and kind of the bad way that they were made and stuff, and I can just kind of look through that and see the good stuff that is there. Like, there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of bad stuff in the prequels, but there's a lot of good stuff that I feel like even with these newer movies, 7 and 8, don't have yet, or I haven't felt yet from them that I feel like with the prequels. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think, so 2 weeks ago, my mother-in-law, shout out to the old buzzard. My mother-in-law was here visiting. Buzz and I were watching Revenge of the Sith. Corey left. My wife, Corey, left the room because she didn't want to watch. And I sat there, and me and Buzz watched Revenge of the Sith. And at the end, when you're watching with someone else and it's like you then see more flaws because you're like, yeah, they probably think this is really stupid. Afterwards, she was, she said she liked it and things like that. But the funniest thing I thought she said was, she's like, it kind of seemed like a bad high school play. And it was so true. Every single, and I love Revenge of the Sith. It's my favorite prequel, my number 4 Star Wars movie. Every single scene with Anakin and Padme is so cringy. It's like, this is not good. This is bad.
Oy.
But like, what has changed? I have come full circle on the prequels. I love them again, for many of the reasons you said. I think one of the big tragedies of life in general is that as you grow up and you kind of lose some of that imagination, is you start to focus more on what I think isn't as important in a movie. I focus less and less on the story and more on the quality of the acting, the CGI, the editing, like the technical, the craft, the technical craft more than the spirit of the story.
I mean, there's a place for that.
There's
a place for that, but I agree, you lose a lot of the love for movies because you focus too much on that than what is the story telling us.
And when you have like a really beautifully crafted movie, it can enhance the spirit of the story so much. But with Star Wars, it's more like the spirit of the story has to overcome the technical part of the prequel, of the prequel movies. And as a kid, as a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old, my imagination filled in the gaps. It made up for some of those flaws. And I just filled in what we didn't see or what wasn't provided to us. I just made it up on my own and loved it. And that, doesn't have, as I have gotten older, I don't do that as much. But I could not, it all comes down to what you said. I could not agree more. With all the flaws of the prequels, the quality of the acting, the overuse of CGI, the kind
racism.
of the racism, all right, the racism, the script and the screenplay and the corny dialogue and things like that. For me, it cannot erase the vast palette of characters, weapons, vehicles, planets, events, so many wonderful things that happen in those movies that enhance the Star Wars franchise.
The history of the Jedi and the Sith.
The lore, just the mythos, adding to the mythology and the lore of Star Wars, the prequels, I think, do a fantastic job. Overall, I like the story of the prequels. I mean, it's kind of the biggest seller to me. That's why I love Revenge of the Sith, because I really liked seeing the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. It is super interesting to me. I mean, Palpatine's kind of the star of the trilogy to me, and his character arc of overthrowing an entire government single-handedly, basically, is fascinating, and I really like the story. So it's got a lot of flaws, and I fully acknowledge that, but I've come full circle on the prequels, and I love them.
Good, because I agree with you. I would consider both of us prequelists, champions of the prequels.
I agree.
mean, obviously, let's be real here. They're not the same as the original trilogy, and we're not comparing them to the original trilogy. We're trying just to talk about the prequels as themselves, right?
So I think that's a good point. So why do the prequels get the hate then? That's the topic of the video. Why do people hate the prequels?
This is what I think. I think the hatred came from, and for good reason, and I completely agree with them, the people who were our age when the original trilogy came out. And they had those movies as their childhood and their teenage years and their 20s and even their 30s. Those were Star Wars, right? And then now you're in your mid-30s, Star Wars is coming back, and you get a fart joke, and, you're like, what is this? What happened to the
the hero's journey?
Yeah, exactly. The cantina, what happened to that stuff? And so, because they were the adults and we were the children, they had a head start in feeding this kind of negative feedback loop of the prequels are bad. And so when we grew up into maturity. We were introduced to this world of the prequels are bad, and we kind of got thrown in with it. And again, if I was them, I would agree with them, but I'm not. I am a millennial who grew up with the prequels.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that. I think as well, to add to that, I think even the original trilogy probably had some casual movie fans who didn't become super fans of the mythology and stuff, but thought for its time, this was a really great movie. The special effects were kind of cutting edge, all of that kind of stuff. Then when you go to the prequels, the casual movie fan might be like, these are not good movies. Just objectively, if I'm not a hardcore Star Wars fan, this wasn't a very good movie. So I think that was part of it. But I think you've hit the nerve. I think that the hatred of the prequels came out of some sort of twisted loyalty to the original trilogy. That these people who grew up with the original trilogy thought, if I say I like the prequels, I'm putting them on the same level as the original trilogy, and they're not on the same level, so I'm going to kind of degrade the prequels to show how much of a fan I am of the original trilogy. You know, that kind of...
yeah, almost like you can't be taken seriously if you say you like the prequels.
Right.
You know? Which is kind of like the same today with The Last Jedi. It's like, oh, I can't even talk to you. You liked The Last Jedi? You know?
But here's the thing. With so much hate that has come for towards The Last Jedi, I think my personality is, when I saw so much hate for the prequels, at first I bought into it, and then over time I'm like, no, you know what? I don't like all the negativity around it. I'm going to defend the prequels, and I find a lot of great things in the prequels. I already feel myself coming around like that with Last Jedi, with so many people who are like, I think, in my own personal opinion, overreacting to how much The Last Jedi ruined Star Wars, that I'm more like, yeah, there are things I don't like about The Last Jedi, but there's some good stuff too, and I find myself kind of coming around on it. And one of the things you said, kids loved the prequels. I have yet to see any fan reaction of a fan under 12 years old that hated The Last Jedi.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, kids love The Last Jedi, and there is a whole new generation of fans that the sequel trilogy is our prequel trilogy.
BB-8 and Rey.
Yes.
And even Porgs and all that jazz.
I'll drop you to Panema Terminal.
Yes. My daughter is 3 years old, hasn't even seen a Star Wars movie, but if we're watching a YouTube clip or if I'm playing Battlefront 2 and she sees Rey, she wants to be Rey.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm like, that's just innate, because she doesn't know the story. She doesn't know. She just sees a girl on the screen that is, killing people, I guess. I guess that's not a good analogy, but, she's just kind of drawn to it. And so I just think over time, just as I think more and more people are appreciating the prequels and coming around on the prequels, I think in time people will do the same for the current movies.
Right.
That people that are really vocal about hating The Last Jedi right now, in 10 years, time will heal some of that stuff, and there's not going to be as much hate, I don't think. And the same with things even like Solo.
Well, I mean, in 10 years, The Last Jedi will have been remade anyway. So.
No. No, it won't. No, it won't. And Solo also gets a bad rap, but it will, I think more people will warm up to it. But I'm glad you brought this up. This remaking The Last Jedi buffoonery that is happening right now, where my producers...
Let me ask you something real fast.
Go ahead.
Are they being serious? We've talked about this on when we played Battlefront, but I kind of want to take the conversation here. Are they being serious, or is it all a joke?
To quote the great John McEnroe, you cannot be serious.
You think it's a joke? You think they're playing us?
If it's not a joke, it is a level of delusion I have never seen in my life. It is the most insane story that they think they are going to raise enough money, to hundreds of millions of dollars, and then that they're going to get Disney's permission.
The intellectual property, yep,
to the intellectual property to remake The Last Jedi, it makes no sense. And I've
A movie that hasn't even been out for a year yet.
It's crazy. I think the real question is, what if Disney came out and said, you know what, because of the fan reaction, we actually are going to remake The Last Jedi. We're going to fund it, and we're just going to... Do you think that... Would you be happy about that?
No, of course not.
Okay, so then let me ask you, would you be happy if in 5 years they said, we're going to reboot the prequel trilogy and remake the prequel movies? Would you be happy about that?
I know what you want me to say. I don't know. I don't know.
Ironic.
Because
I would be livid.
I would be upset too, but I would also be extremely curious to see what could happen.
I think it would be a crime to remake the prequels, just like I think it would be a crime and ridiculous to remake The Last Jedi, because of the things that we just talked about. If you remake the prequels, if you remake The Last Jedi, you erase all of the positive that it brings, unless you try to shoehorn every one of those details in. But how are you going to gauge what some people hate, other people love? So you're not going to be able to get a good pulse on, well, we got to put Mace Windu back in, but then if Samuel L. Jackson doesn't reprise the role, you're going to have people that for the rest of time go, these are my prequels with the Samuel L. Jackson Mace Windu.
That's true.
This new Mace Windu, that's not my Mace Windu.
This party's over.
Just like people are already talking about Han Solo, like, that's not my Han Solo. And it's like, okay, let's all, like, and Solo's not even...
I can appreciate that. And 5 to 10 years, I would not be ready for a prequel reboot.
Yeah.
30 years? I'd be down for it. I would much rather them create new Star Wars movies and tell different stories than ever touch the prequels. I'll just say that right now. I don't want them to touch the prequels. But I think the question was, how would I react if they said they were going to? I would be interested. But I don't want them to do it. There are so many more stories. I'd rather have a feature trilogy about Salacious Crumb than them remake the prequels.
Or my Gonk Droid movie.
Gonk Droid. That's right.
Or why would you remake the prequels when people want the Obi-Wan movie? I mean, go watch our past video. Click the link here for the past video.
That was a good plug.
I gotta figure
out how to do that.
Why are you asking this of me?
I think that brings us to the end of this video. This has been a good discussion. I think we both, except for a few things, we pretty much agree on our love for the prequels. But I think that's going to bring up some comments in the comment section. So we're both anxious to hear what you have to say. You don't have to agree with us. Let us know what you think. Do you love the prequels? Do you hate them? Would you like to see them remade?
What story ideas from the prequels do you think don't work for you, and how would you change them? What would you like? What do you think could have made the prequels better? I think it's still a very valid opinion to not like the prequels. I don't disrespect that opinion, but for me, and I think for you too, Joseph, we like to look at everything positive that it brings to Star Wars and how it enriches the galaxy and kind of the world building that it provides to the franchise. I think is unparalleled. So
yeah. I think, let me just end on this. I think one of my favorite things I've done regarding the prequels is one time I live tweeted all of the good things about the prequels as I watched one of them.
I remember that.
Do you? And I really enjoyed that because it
was
kind of
awesome.
It forced me to. Maybe I'll do it again. I can't remember which. I think it was episode 2, maybe. Anyway.
No, don't do it, because if we reach 10,000 likes on this video, the Salty Socks Twitter account will do a live tweet of the prequel movie.
How about a lesser goal? How about
2 likes on this video?
2 likes. 1 like from us. Here we go. General Grievous in the escape pod.
Time to abandon ship.
Abandoned ship,
Time
baby.
to abandon ship. Anyway, I think that'd be fun if we did that.
That would be really fun. We should do that for sure.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching this video. Leave a like, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, leave a comment down below.
That's right.
And let us know what you think about the prequels. We're excited. I know we took a couple weeks off, but we're excited to keep up with the podcast, and we'll see you next time. And until next time, Joseph.
Keep those socks. Salty!
Oh my gosh.
See
That
ya.
was perfect. Please leave that in. See ya.